This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.
Hi everybody, it's John Hall, the senior editor of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, and I'm at one of the many Iron Hill Brewery and Restaurant locations, and across from me is Mark Edelson, who is one of the founders of the brewery, and I guess the brewpub chain, as it were.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about brewpubs, we're going to talk about expansion plans, we're going to talk about what a difference 20 plus years can make in this overall industry. But first, I want to thank our sponsors who make these episodes possible. As the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, reliability, and dedication to their customers' craft. Thinking outside of the box, whether it's a simple relocation of the utility connections for a complex buildup or ground-level design and engineering, G&D is ready to meet the challenge. Contact G&D Chillers today at 1-800-555-0973, or you can reach out online at gdchillers.com. Mention this podcast, the Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine podcast, and receive up to $1,000 worth of glycol with the purchase of any new G&D chiller. And also, Tavour makes it possible to access and discover the highest-rated craft beers from all over the world through the free mobile app. Twice a day, you can get access to new limited beer from an independent craft brewer. Imagine sipping a vanilla ice cream stout from Wild Leap Brewing Company in Georgia or Juicy Bits IPA from Weld Works in Colorado. Join the independent beer community today and get $10 in beer with the code BREWING when you go to their website, tavour.com. Mark Edelson, you've been in this for, more than 20 years now.
23 years.
And you were a home brewer before that.
I was.
And we have a lot of listeners who are home brewers and a lot of folks who are thinking about going pro. What was your aha moment when you were in the garage, in the basement, in the kitchen, doing 5-gallon batches, when you and your buddies finally got together and they said, let's make a go of this? Because 96, when the first of the Iron Hills opened, was a totally different landscape and arguably a little bit harder than it might be today.
Sure. Definitely, I think the proliferation of breweries that you've seen has been because the barriers to get in are much lower than they used to be. And so, but when we were home brewers, my aha was because there wasn't a lot going on in Philadelphia back in the late 80s, right? And so I attended so we were homebrewing with Mike, who's my current partner, and I had attended a alumni event in Wilmington because I was a graduate of University of Pennsylvania, so we had a chapter down there. And they had a beer tasting event, and they invited a guy called Jeff Ware.
Okay.
If you remember Jeff, he's the founder of Dock Street,
yeah.
Right? He and Rosemary, he was married to Rosemary
yeah.
at the time. And and Dock Street was on the market as a contract brew, and he rolled out these blueprints for this thing he wanted to build called a brewpub in the middle of Philadelphia, right? And I looked at this thing and I said, "Wow, look at that, right? This, a restaurant with a brewery right in it, this small brewery," and I was just fascinated by it. And we continued to be home brewers, and my partner and I really were thinking about it, and you get that tired of what you're doing thing, and why don't you do something that you're passionate about?
Yeah.
And I think that's how it starts for just about everybody.
The interesting thing, though, is when you think about the brewpub model, it's something that today's generation largely shies away from. They say, okay, we want to be a beer manufacturer, maybe we'll bring in taco trucks, we'll bring in food trucks,
Sure.
We want to be a production brewery with a tap room. 96 was such a different time, though, we weren't even using the word craft at this point. It was still microbrew
Yes.
at that
Yes.
point. You needed, not necessarily needed, but I think it probably helped to have a restaurant component to get people through the door to then introduce them to the beers that you were making in-house.
Absolutely, and it's funny because I think what we were committed to doing from the beginning, because if you think about brew pubs, and I'll just talk about the people's perception of brew pubs over time.
Yeah.
But People always thought of brew pubs back then as having great beer and having food was not their focus, right? And, when we went in, we were very committed, and my third partner is a restaurateur, and we were very, very committed to say, we're going to be a great restaurant, right? That's how we're going to differentiate, is that people shouldn't just have to compromise on the food to come in, like, we'll just live with the food. And so, from the beginning, we've always said we're a restaurant, and 70% of our sales are food sales.
Sure.
Which is different than tap rooms and tasting rooms. And so,
yeah.
and
that math checks out, yeah.
Yes. And so, and that's maintained there that, if you came in and didn't like beer, you're going to have a great experience from the food and all the other products that we, and our differentiator from other restaurants is that we make our own beer and we make great beer. And so that's really what we wanted, how we wanted to differentiate in the beginning, and that really set us apart, and that continues to set us apart.
Do you think of it as two separate entities under the same roof, or are there...
No, not at all. It's very integrated. It has to be,
Why? Why does it have to be?
Well, because, you're looking for the customer, the whole experience, right? And they shouldn't have two different experiences, right? So, tableside, the employees should know a lot about beer, right? One of the biggest compliments we get all the time is our server knowledge. And one of the most frustrating things I have going into other brew pubs is a server who tells me, well, I don't really like beer, so I don't know much about it. And I'm always like, I'm not interested in what your particular likes and dislikes are. I want to know about your products.
Yeah.
And so, but at the same time, we like to take our servers who come in, I don't say this anymore, but they came in as, they don't drink craft beer at all. Now, more younger people do.
I imagine, yeah.
But they become huge craft beer fans. We really convert them. And when they're craft beer fans, they sell more, right?
So this is the and I'm jumping ahead from where I wanted to go, but 1,400 full-time and part-time employees right now in and there's 18 locations, right? So it started
16.
16. I'm sorry, but
two more are in the works right now. So
more,
soon to
okay.
Be, yes.
So 16 altogether in Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, South Carolina, right, and going into Georgia, yes, fairly soon. So spread out all throughout the East Coast, yes, more or less. But 1,400 employees. Mm-hmm. I'm always amazed when I walk into breweries, much like you, or tap rooms, or small places where, I'll say to folks, what can you tell me about this? And, it's a lager. It's a good seller. Sure. And there's nothing behind it.
Sure.
When you have that many people, and when you have a place where the customer interaction, where people are consciously coming in to sit down, maybe they're with mm-hmm, their family, maybe they're on a date, maybe they're whatever it is, they're expecting a certain level of restaurant service.
Yes.
It's one thing to know the specials of the day. It's another thing to know that, yes, the kitchen can prepare this without peanuts or, whatever. To add on that level of beer afterwards. What goes into employee training? Because it's all under one roof.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, the important thing, of course, is having a brewer on site.
Okay.
Right? So you have a resident expert, and you ask, circling back to the original question, which was are they two separate entities? And they cannot be, right? So the brewer is a member of the staff here too, and that's one of his primary jobs, aside from making great beer, is to educate the staff and to get that. We always say your job is to get the staff excited about beer, right? And there's a lot of ways to do that, and one of them, of course, is educating them on beer, and they have to know about beer, and getting people in front of beer, and really appreciating the beer, and that's something that the brewer, a passionate brewer, has to do. It's not. We look for a different personality in our breweries, I have to say. Not the guy that just wants to, or guy or gal that wants to just brew beer and leave for the day, right? It has to be somebody that can engage the staff and can engage customers as well. And that's an important part of what they're required to do is that, because again, I'm not just pushing beer through the wall, right? I'm integrated in this whole customer experience about beer, right? We can't give them partial experience. It's all, the hospitality is so competitive, and it's more competitive these days than I have to say, in the 23 years. I mean, there's more restaurants than there ever has been. And so I would say the population hasn't increased as much by that, although more people are eating out. But we're all vying for better experiences. We're really trying to give people better experiences, and it's all about that. And we need a brewer who also can add to that experience, not just with the product.
So how do you find somebody like that? Because, I know some brewers who like to come in at 6 a.m.,
Sure.
They mash in, they do the thing, and then, maybe they'll have a beer at the bar, and then, but they're mostly gone. It can be a very solitary...
Yeah, and that's not really, how do we find that? That's like every job within the restaurant, right? How do you find the best? But we do hire a lot from within. We always have traditionally done that, and that's great.
In what ways, though? If there's somebody who is a server or somebody who wants to, or is bartending,
or kitchen employee, or anybody. So it's interesting because, and so I would say at least half our staff has been promoted from within, right?
Really?
Yeah, and that started a couple of years ago because people from the outside I get inundated, as you can imagine, with emails saying, "Hey, I'd love to work in a brewery. I don't have any experience, or I'm a home brewer, and love to come to work for you," right?
And you say, "I'd love to let you wash some kegs."
So my response to that is that, look, we only hire from the outside people with experience or education professionally, right? But we do hire internally. So if you're interested, come get a job at Iron Hill, and if we notice you and you're a good employee, you have a good opportunity to get into the brewery.
How many people actually follow up on that?
Because a lot.
Really?
After a while, it's interesting. After a while, I just did it. I'll be honest. I just did it to get people off my back.
Because I imagine that would be a thing. Like if I wanted to be a brewer and I read that, I'd be like, I don't want to bar back.
You know what? But that's how almost all of our staff. A lot of our staff was in reaction to that. They said, okay. I come in, they get a server job, and I started to get emails from some of our general managers saying, "Hey, just to let you know, there's somebody on my staff, and they're doing really well, but they told me the only reason they joined Iron Hill was to eventually get in the brewery. So just wanted to let you know." And this started popping up all over the place, and started to hear that, and I'm like, okay, and so we have a lot of people who come in and say, I want to be successful at this portion. And so, restaurant work is hard work, and brewery work is hard work. And so it's great because you get to see people in action and find out if they're lazy or if they're, and so we get a good look at them in the brewery side and can make some decisions. It's so hard to hire from the outside no matter what job, because you're in an hour interview and maybe do some background or call some reference checks, but that's all you have. It's much easier to make a decision with somebody who's been working for you for 6 months or a year, And
it can take that long. I mean, but that's sort of the difference between when you first started and now as well. There's more people. This is an industry that people are aware of now. It's no longer on the fringes. We're going to hit 8,000 breweries in the country, of which you're a fairly decent percentage of.
But you know what? You have to weed through with that, and you're right, is, boy, I always thought it'd be cool to brew, right? Because we get a lot of that, right? And that's okay. Everybody thinks it's cool to brew, but, here's what we invite a lot of people to actually come in and brew with us, especially employees, to see, 70% of brewing is scrubbing.
Yeah, exactly.
just to be clear, right? There's no real way around that. So,
and I imagine you don't have too many automated brew houses in your.
No,
so there's a lot of shoveling grain. There's a lot of.
Yes. It's all handcrafted.
But that, to me, I think sort of speaks to holding on to an era of the industry that a lot of folks either don't remember because they turned 21 well after you first started, and just aren't exposed to these days because it's not the model that exists.
Sure, Exactly. And you brought up a good point that's interesting, is that we have employees and customers who do not know a world without craft beer.
Sure.
And that's a complete shift.
Yeah.
Like you said,
people growing up and saying, oh, my dad only drank Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, or my dad only drank Sam Adams. Like, that's foreign to me even. But but there's certainly folks who come in these days who know
absolutely.
that. When you're talking to brewers, though, because with 16 locations, with the Iron Hill brand that exists, there has to be certain specs that you want to hit. There has to be, okay, like we're going to do this, or we're going to, I'm sure you have employee handbooks now. You can't be your size and just sort of shoot from the hip anymore.
Not at all.
And there have to be people who come in who say, okay, I want to do a batshit crazy, banana tropical stout, or, Trillium just did this, and I want to try my hands on it. And you have this sort of Cheshire Cat grin right now, where like you get it, but you're also like, but like let's learn how to make lagers first, or let's learn how to,
Absolutely, and we, I think from the so. I'm an engineer by trade, so things are I like technical, I like black and white, and, but I'm very passionate about brewing. And so, very early on, as we got past 4 and 5 locations, we said, we got to get our hands around this on the brewery side and put in a lot more procedures and protocols. And I came out of the pharmaceutical industry, which just...
It's pretty regimented.
Yeah, it's very regimented. So I have a background in...
The margins are lower in beer, but
Yes, in regimen, in a production environment. I ran the manufacturing department of a pharmaceutical plant. So that kind of was always in my nature, so it was easy to to put some fences around that.
Sure.
But the other thing you talk about is what you make, and I think one of the things that we're very proud of from the brewery side is that we have our signature beers, our 6 signature beers, which are the same in every brewery. But
which are what? Do you know them off the top of your head? I'm putting you on the spot here.
It's our Iron Hill Light Lager. It's our Vienna Lager. So 2 of our signature beers are lagers. It's our Pig Iron Porter. It's our Orehouse IPA, and it's our White Iron Wit and our Witberry. And we maintain a list of about 15 products, right, which is a lot for a brew pub.
Yeah.
And I'll talk about that later. And then the rest of it is somewhat up to the brewer to decide. I mean, if we're doing, we're going to have Pumpkin Ale and Oktoberfest on next month, and it's what everybody has to, because you know what? You're crazy if you don't, right? So
you're 100% crazy if you don't.
So we make those decisions because those are company-wide promotions to do that. But after that, we kind of, we used to freehand say whatever, right? And that we reined in a little bit because...
Was it starting to get just out of control, or was it?
No, but this is, part of what we have to teach them is to be good business people too, right? Because they have to run the business, the beer business portion of it, right? And the business part of it is you have to brew beers that people want to buy, right? It really makes no sense for us to brew something that people won't buy. From a sales standpoint, from a freshness standpoint, all of that. And so you have to make some good decisions around that. So where we land recently is, in the last year and a half, is that we kind of have a template of what they should have on. They should have on so many IPA, and it changes over time. Have to have a New England IPA on, right? Now, we have a couple company-wide recipes, and you're crazy right now if you don't have Philly Special on going into the Eagles season. But,
that was the sound of 3/4 of the country turning this podcast off. So thanks very much. That's,
And so so we give them guidance around that hey, look, here's the slots you have to fill, because this is what we're seeing in the marketplace as the ideal list. And so they either can use company recipes or create their own recipes around that. And we do some review of those recipes. And it allows us to, one, do more product development, because some of these recipes that come out are stunning. They really are. And then we look to adopt those maybe as company-wide recipes, make them available to people.
So if somebody does one here, so we're in Maple Shade, New Jersey right now, so if somebody does one here and you taste it, the rest of the team tastes it, and you're like, holy crap, this is something else.
Yeah, and that's how it happens too.
Is that really how it works?
Well, we're drinking the Rhein's Maiden.
We are, which is
a wonderful, German Pilsner.
Yes.
Right? And by one of our assistant brewers here, and she put it together, and it's great. I had it in another restaurant, the same recipe, and it was so tasty. And so those are the ones where you go, wow, this is great.
We got to get it out there.
Boy, I wish I could say that I've tasted every seasonal that's out there in rotation all the
That'd
time.
be quite a lot.
Yeah, it's quite a lot. So we rely on our regional brewers and people to kind of bubble that up and say, hey, you need to taste this. And I'll go and taste it and say, so we look for those ahas. And I look at sales too. Look, customers tell us what they like with what they buy. I see reports every morning that tell me what customers like, and so we can tell. So as we've gotten bigger, we're very driven by data, which is great. I love that because as an engineer, I love data. But with mid-sized companies now, just with all of IT, small companies can have data at their fingertips and should use it more. And we use data a lot, and we use velocity of products, and we look at it, and we use that to educate our brewers, because sometimes it's this beer they made, they're so passionate about it, and it's great, and I'm like, it is great, but we're never going to brew it again. Because
it sits for if you're the only one drinking it post shift.
We have some brewers that are passionate about English beers, and I'm sorry to say, but nobody. Right? You same thing.
Of course, yeah.
I love an English mild, but nobody is drinking English mild.
Yeah.
They will sit in a tank and that's a shame because there's such, the subtle beers sometimes have been lost in recent years.
Yeah.
And they're harder to make. And they're wonderful products, but we've got drinkers right now wanting the punch in the face of flavor, and so you have to look at the business side. We're trying to teach everybody look at the business side of things. There's always going to be a slow seller. We have sour beers on; they're still wonderful, but still people aren't embracing them completely.
All right, I want to touch on that in just a minute. This is from Hops Direct. 5 generations of hops grown in Yakima Valley, Washington, sold directly from their farm to you. Skip the middleman and go for the farm fresh green. Their hops are harvested, processed, and kept in cold storages on their farm until shipping straight to you. That lager's starting to hit me now. Find 100 plus domestic and imported varieties in pellet and leaf year-round on their website by the pound at wholesale pricing. Thanks for supporting family-owned and shopping small. It's a big deal. You can visit hopsdirect.com. You can email them at info@hopsdirect.com or find them on social media at hopsdirect. And also, balancing barley and hops is your expertise, brewers. And for Clarion Lubricants, food-grade lubricants is theirs. The team at Clarion knows that when it comes to making great beer, you're the expert. And when it comes to supplying food-grade lubricants backed by service-oriented professionals, they're the experts. Clarion will work with you to create an efficient lubrication program that helps you protect your brewery. To speak with an expert, dial 1-855-MY-CLARION. That's 1-855-692-5274. Or visit clarionlubricants.com. Clarion Lubricants, the experts that experts trust. The thing about brew pubs, Mark Edelson of Iron Hill, as we sit here, that I came up in the era of drinking where I was more often going to brew pubs than not. Mm-hmm. And when I talk about this in Drink Beer, Think Beer, my book, of being a young reporter and trying to find the brew pubs because, one, I could get a better meal than I could at other places, mm-hmm. Like the Applebee's at the Holiday Inn lobby. And it was also like sort of a local gathering place as well. So it was like your local tavern in a way where mm-hmm. you could also just get fresh made beer on site. The data part of it is really interesting because in those days when I would walk in, there would always be a Hefeweizen, there'd always be a blonde ale. There was no lagers back then. It was always it was all ales straight off the bat because that's what was available to the brewers to make, and lagering space didn't exist, and I also think that there's such a push from let's get away from Bud Miller Coors, and they're known for lager and pilsners, and let's focus on ales, which could seem exotic. Sure. And now we're sort of coming back where I imagine that there's a lot of people who walk into your 16 locations and, soon to be 18, and you're hoping 20 by 20, and I want to get to that in just a minute, who walk in and still say, what's your closest thing to Miller Lite, your Coors Light, Bud Light, et cetera. And to grow, I imagine you had data that said, okay, like we need to bring lagers into the fold. We need to be making these. We need to be...
Well, interesting. So we always started, one of the things we started from the beginning is to differentiate is we're always going to have a lager on tap, right? Because brew pubs, like you said, didn't have lagers.
Yeah.
And that became an excuse, I think, for brew pubs to turn beers faster. I mean, you can put capacity in and deal, and we did, right? And
well, I was going to say, because that's a financial commitment, where you just have beer sitting for a couple of extra weeks.
But you have to look at the backside of the equation is that drives sales too, right? Because like you said, if we're going to be a restaurant, right, where it's 70% driven by food, think about it. 45% of all beer sold in America is a low-calorie beer, right? So if we're going to be a restaurant, what are those drinkers going to drink, right? Now, in the beginning, we did a Helles, and we had a light ale, but we eventually went to a light lager, and a lot of brew pubs would carry national brands, right, to do that. And we always said we're carrying only our beer. And we have guest beers in. Guest craft beers all the time because we want to support the industry or if we do events. But we don't have national brands in. And you can't just not fill that slot. And so we brew a light lager. It's a big seller for it.
When you say national brands that you're talking about that don't fit into the BA definition, or are you talking...
Yeah, when I say national brands, I mean Bud Miller Coors.
Okay.
Right? And so...
Because like Sierra and Sam and all of that.
Yeah. Right? I should stop that because that's changed now because the craft brewers, there are craft brewers that are now national brands.
And you're in how many states and growing?
Yes. But historically, we would refer to national brands as the national brands, which are the big three. And so, and then Heineken in there. And so we said we're going to brew it ourselves. And people come in and say, "What do you have? Do you have a Miller Lite?" No, we don't, but here's our light lager. Why don't you try this? And so we just don't want to alienate. That's why we have full liquor licenses. That's why we serve wine. That's why we serve liquor. Because the wine drinker, if you're going to make the dining choice and 3 of the 4 people drink beer and 1 drinks wine, you're not coming to Iron Hill if we don't have wine, right? So we try to make sure that it's experiential. We give the full experience to it. The majority of 70% of the alcohol we sell is beer.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Is it so? 70% of alcohol is still the beer, and it's the majority of that is your beer.
It's all our beer.
Okay. Well, when you have other
so if we have other
well,
outside brands,
it's a small percentage of that. Of that 70.
We'll be doing an event or something like that.
But you've also had to evolve as well because. What I find interesting when I walk into brew pubs that started in your era, and I don't think you guys are stuck in the past by any means because like you have been looking forward, but there are brew pubs that started in the late 90s where you walk in and here's our stout recipe that we've been making since
and here's our 6
the
beers
Clinton
on
administration.
Tap.
Exactly, and every time I walk in I can set my watch to exactly what it's going to be.
And so.
But I have a New England IPA in front of me that I'm enjoying that you're making.
We learned a couple of things. One was we had the 6 or 7 beers on tap when we first opened, right? And that's what we maintained for a little while because that's all we quote unquote could do, right? But look, when you have beer bars opening that are carrying 50, 60, and 100, which I disagree with. Because they're still selling the same 20 beers.
Sure. There's a lot of beer sitting in lines there. Yeah.
The brewers cringe at this. And but what we said is, if across the street they have, let's just say 25 to 30 beers, they have world-class beers across the street, right? Craft brewers available and a huge variety. And what are we doing? Right, and we really had to make a shift to say we have to put more beers on tap. Now we live in kegs like crazy right now to do it, but our brewers jump through hoops to do it. We have 15 beers on, and that's what I feel when you saw our list at the bar there. And when customers look up at that. I feel like after 15, they just get confused. So we try to keep it tight enough that they can see something they like, but have a lot of choice and feel like a choice. When people say 100, that's the wow factor. They get a lot of credit for the wow factor. I always say this, people love choice, but they hate to choose.
Yeah.
Right? So I love 100, but I'm still drinking Sierra Nevada Pale Ale.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
Right?
I walk into those places,
yes.
and I always ask the bartender, what's the beer that you just most recently tapped? Because I know that that's going to be the freshest keg there, and I'm just going to go for that for one, and then I'm probably going to leave afterwards. So this brings up sort of an interesting thing, though, about the rise of the beer bars as well. Because in '96, if you wanted to drink craft beer, if you wanted to drink microbrew, you had to go to the place where it was manufactured. And now, an Applebee's will open up down the street, and they're going to have Dogfish or Sam, or they're going to have whoever on, because it's just sort of part of the general consciousness. When you have 16 locations now, you don't necessarily even have to worry about those places like the Applebee's or the local restaurant down the street. You also have to worry about your own individual footprint.
Yes.
So when you are planning expansion, when you're thinking about, and you obviously have to abide by local laws as well. Pennsylvania is a little bit more liberal where you can open up more spaces.
We love Pennsylvania.
Jersey's holding you guys back, and I'm sorry about that.
We're done in New Jersey. We can talk about
two and
that
done.
later.
Yeah, no, we'll talk about that at the bar. It's I don't need the ABC on my back, man. And but going into Georgia where the laws have changed, going into South Carolina where they've popped the cap, where all of these different things are happening, you have to. I imagine you must have a map on your office wall that has radiuses that exist saying, okay, we're doing really well here, or we're thinking about going here, but we can't get this close to this location, or maybe we can, and that, maybe this place isn't all that. Yeah, I mean, because there's strategic growth that comes that's not necessarily like a full-on distribution brewery where it's like, okay, let's get into as many markets with as many distributors as possible, because you guys are a little bit different with the beers that you are putting up because they're coming from individual locations.
And from our real estate strategy, I mean, obviously we've populated the Philly market pretty well with what we do. And so we're looking, instead of a strategy like a Craftworks, which puts a single location in cities all over the place, right? So,
who is Craftworks?
Craftworks is Rock Bottom and Gordon Beers.
Okay,
right?
all right.
So
I didn't know that was the parent company.
And so, they'll be in this city and that city. And that was, kind of a standard strategy for a lot of different restaurant groups.
Yeah.
Our strategy currently is that we're going to go into a market and then we're going to open a few of them, right? That way we get synergy from a lot of things, from the brewing, from the marketing, from the reputation, it's particularly markets that we like. So, we're in the South, we're in South Carolina, we're looking very heavily. North Carolina was one of the areas we first started looking in, but the site really came up in South Carolina. And we've got one announced in Georgia, but in Atlanta, but we're looking very closely at another one.
Yeah.
And so in the South, we kind of skip D.C. right now. We're still looking at that market pretty heavily, but I feel like we're in Manhattan when I look at the real estate costs of Northern Virginia.
100%, yeah.
But the South is wonderful.
And you're not in Manhattan either.
No,
but yeah.
And we're not.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And so
there's nobody in Manhattan right now. But
no. And no, we're not really looking north right now. I mean, you've got New York right above us.
Yeah.
And that's just such a tough market. But the South is wonderful. And the South has evolved craft beer-wise tremendously in the last decade. It really has. And so, a lot of great beer drinkers, a lot of, for us, there's a lot of relocation people, especially from our area where our headquarters is in Wilmington, down in Charlotte. So many of the B of A people that are in Wilmington are in Charlotte half the month. And so we have a lot of brand recognition down there in some aspects of it, but also just the marketplace is terrific. It really is expanding and growing. And look at what Southern Tier and Victory did. They plopped a big facility right down there, right in South Charlotte, right? They get that too. They see the same things that we're seeing. So when you look at some of these real estate moves, you get what everybody is seeing about where craft beer is expanding.
Because it's not just about the beer, but it's also about the chance to make the impression on people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the thing that I find really interesting, especially from the brewpub model, which I know that, again, there's so many of the newer brewers who are coming out who don't want the restaurant aspect of it. But this, for me, in many ways, is ground zero of beer education. If craft is 13% of the overall marketplace right now, you need a place where people can come in, get a burger, order a glass of wine if they want, maybe find something else, if they're not into it, but also have that sort of hand-holding education that exists. And that comes back to beer being a business, not necessarily, a straight-up passion project. Because I think passion's important.
Yes.
But if you're not thinking about... people don't always talk about real estate in the terms that you just did. So
you have to look at it like a business. And I think, we're going to have a shakeout.
You think so?
In the next 5 years, sure.
You think
Absolutely.
so? Why?
Yes, absolutely. I think a couple of reasons. You're going to see just a general slowdown of things. We're starting to see it anyway, right? And so once a slowdown starts, and maybe not a decrease, but just a slowdown. I mean, we saw it in the late 90s, right? So inevitably, it will start slowing a little bit. The problem is, from a business standpoint, is as that starts to squeeze a little bit, the good business people will come through, and the ones that aren't good at business will struggle and not know what to do. And a lot of people are making money right now in spite of themselves. That's any industry, that's any business. That's what happened in the late 90s in craft, right? It was never, everyone say the bubble popped. The bubble never popped. It slowed down. The good thing about it is what happened is the consumers cleaned out the poor producers, and there was more for the rest of us. It really was, it was terrific. And, to say, right?
Yeah, no. But
and we just move in on the rest of the, like I said, people are still drinking beer and still drinking craft beer. And there's just more for the rest of us that we're running our businesses right. And I talk to people about this all the time. So the pinch will come again. And when consumers, look, I hate to say this, but everybody's making beer right now. There's some wonderful new producers out there, and there's some terrible producers.
Oh, yeah, I've
said
that on
everybody,
the show. Yeah.
And everybody's selling beer. But when things start drying up, consumers will move to the good producers and not the bad producers, and people that are even making great beer but not running their business right are gonna struggle, and it's just a normal business cycle. And understanding more about that is pretty important.
So your company has talked about 20 breweries by 2020.
Sure.
It's this big marketing push that I keep getting from your folks of
right.
And the Brewers Association, years ago, Kim Jordan stood on stage at the Craft Brewers Conference, and you were a board member.
I was a board member.
At the time.
I remember going in the meeting, setting up that, 20%.
20% of beer volume, not beer sales, but beer volume by 2020.
20 by 20.
And we're at 13% in August right now of 2019. It's not going to happen. It struck me as sort of, I don't know, is it Icarus? Is it?
For us?
Well, for you, one, because if a contraction is coming, you're going to have to look at the overall marketplace and say, okay, all right, we have 16, 18, 20 places. Do you have those thoughts of if something doesn't perform, we have to close it?
So the restaurant industry does not move the same way that the craft beer industry or the beer industry in general.
Okay.
And just having been, a retail restaurant is a portion of that market, but that market has a lot of other moving parts in it. And so when we look at how well we do, if you put the Iron Hill cycle up against the craft beer cycle, it doesn't match at all.
Okay.
But if you put it up against the restaurant cycle, it completely matches it, right? So, what happens in craft beer doesn't immediately translate into the restaurant industry, right? The restaurant industry sees upturns and downturns based on a lot of other things other than people drinking craft beer. And we kind of wax and wane with that. So that's where we keep an eye on what's happening with that. But the same thing happens in the restaurant business. There's a lot of restaurants out there, but who's creating the right experiences, right? Why, and it's not just about the products. The products are important, the service is important, but the whole experience is important. We're doing renovations in a lot of our locations to not be as tired and old as,
because the number of restaurants that exist where you walk in and it feels like just like you did when you were a kid and your parents were going there, and
we have restaurants that are 23 years old, so yeah.
So you have to put a fresh coat of paint.
Yeah.
You have to rethink the way that things go.
And it's beyond a fresh coat of paint kind of thing. We're spending significant money in some of our stores to renovate them and to make them fresh again and to start to appeal to a different crowd than we did younger crowd, I should say, than we did 23 years ago. Because you're right, sometimes we're looked at as, that's my parents' place, right? And that's, I'm in the parents' age and, we're all getting older, but how do we're all looking at how, business people are all trying to figure out Xers and millennials and what they want and how do we sell stuff to them, right? And so, but that's because we're in business, right?
And that's got to be a tough conversation to have. Is there a certain level of, at some point, you just kind of have to trust in the people that are around you, even if it goes against what you personally think or what you got into years ago? Because you've been a brewer long enough. You've been in this sort of regimented world long enough where, it's, we've always done.
Yeah,
this.
It's interesting. So, as you know, we brought on a private equity group.
Yes.
3 years ago now, and that's been wonderful for us. But,
that's A&M, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But and last year we brought in a new CEO, who's been tremendous. And the only thing that we knew running a restaurant business was Iron Hill, right? Well, there's a lot more out there, and so we've really brought in a lot of outside people with experience outside of Iron Hill to really open our eyes up about what's possible in the restaurant industry. And so, we were always stuck. And our CEO went around for the first couple of months and just asked people about stuff, and he said, the response I always got the most of, well, that's the way we've always done it, right?
Yeah.
So, and so what's been refreshing is a relook at that stuff and some of the simplest stuff,
Like what?
Changing uniforms. We got rid of the placemat. Remember the old placemat we always had, with the beer process on it?
Oh, sure,
And, right?
Now it's painted on the wall.
And now it's painted on the wall, and we've lost placemats because that's just not the look that we're, and we have the rolled silver in linen.
Yeah.
I mean, those are small little things, but it raises the level of what customers see, and it changes us a little bit and in a better direction, I think, to what we're trying to get. And so but when you've looked at it, for 23 years and it's the same, you get used to it. And so fresh eyes are tremendous for an organization that has been around as long as ours. And so, like you said, New England IPA is a great example of it for me, right? I was like, what? We are not brewing this stuff, right? I'm like, that cloudy stuff? Come on. Just because you don't have a filter, you're serving me that, right? And I fought it. I am no longer fighting these things, right?
Do you drink it, though?
Oh, yeah, I love it.
Do you?
When they're well made,
okay.
When they're juicy, when they are truly juicy. Look, there's a lot of people putting cloudy beer in glasses.
Uh-huh.
I would say 40% shouldn't be putting it in glasses,
sure.
Right? But some of it is fantastic where I was like, we need to make it like this. And what we've decided is as we go into these products that we're going to work hard to make sure it's the best and then get that information out to our brewers in the field. And this is how we're going to do it. So our New England IPAs are stunning. They really are. And that's what we're going to do with that. And I have to tell you, we sell. And again, back to the customers let us know what they want.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
We have to have one on. We're crazy not.
But
to
I
have
imagine
one
you have 23-year-olds who walk in, and I just had the and this is a little tongue-in-cheek, I imagine, with you guys, the hipster IPA as well, and there's a whole thing on your website of like the hipster starter kit, which you get a can of this and some skinny jeans and a bolo tie and mustache wax or something like that, which sort of shows me like where you still kind of think of this beer is like it's something that is not necessarily where you started from, and
yes, it isn't where we started from. But I talked to a lot of our, we have a small group in Philadelphia, the Brotherly Suds, right?
Yeah,
and it's the whole group of us that started in the late '90s, right? And we don't get together enough, but once a year we get together and brew.
Sure.
And a couple of years ago we were talking about these cloudy beers, and everybody was like, "Oh my God, I'm not making that." Right? And it's just now we're all making.
Now
them.
you're all making them.
Now we're all making them.
But yours get from what I could tell, at least from drinking this, was yours gets hit by a filter. Like there's some like this wasn't necessarily like or you're just letting it drop out a little bit. You're just letting it.
I don't know over time with that or things like that. But it's not as super hazy as some get.
As some of the others, but I imagine that has to straddle the worlds that you live in, right?
Sure.
Because there are the parents who still walk in who might hear about their kids drinking hazy IPAs, and this might be a good gateway for them.
Sure.
Versus like the kids walking in and being like, well, I can't rub my finger through this and not come out with sediment kind of thing.
Mud.
The role of being, though, in many ways, a gateway brewery because of the restaurant, because of the longevity. That's got to be something that's part of not only the legacy but the future as well.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to be the complete innovator and have some style on that's because our let me give you an example.
All
right. Earlier this year, we did milkshake IPAs, right? And we put them
Ton of
on a
lactose,
couple. Yeah, exactly,
yeah.
right? And I tasted some of them. They were great. They were just exactly what is being put out there.
Now, hold on. When you say that you did some of them, did you put it out to your different brewers saying, let's do this?
Well, they asked if they could do that.
Okay,
And
so
I'm like,
multiple locations
all right,
asked.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So, and I said, all right, if we're going to do this, let's see the research. What are people doing with it? And let's see what is going on with it. And so we put some out there, but, our customers just are like, what is this? In general, again, it's the gateway thing is that, and so while New England IPAs are selling like crazy, the bulk of some of our customer base has no idea what that is. Whereas in the garage brewery up the street, they have 4 of them on.
Right.
And
they're moving fast.
I assume they're moving fast. And so that's why they have 4 on, right? And so I'm like, all right, we're trying this for now. Let's park this until either it catches up or it's not a thing anymore. And and we're doing brewed IPAs, which are getting a little bit of legs. But again,
you think so?
We see a little bit of it, but again, that's specialty. So we try to stay in the fringes of what is popping up in there and making sure that we're in the game, because we relate to the New England IPA, and that was my fault as overseeing of the brewery. And I said, we're not going to do that again. We need to stay on the edge,
right?
If we're going to appeal to youngers, we have to be there with our products. But we're not creating all of a sudden this new product with that, because again, you look at who's walking in the door with a restaurant. It's a wide and diverse population.
So it's more keeping up than necessarily like.
I think it's keeping up.
Yeah.
It's being right on the curve.
Okay.
I would say.
And with so many different brewers, you have the opportunity for that, especially
Absolutely.
where what's playing in Atlanta right now might be different than what's playing in the Philly area.
Yep. And we see that in South Carolina. Our
do you?
brewer down there who's from up here, they're loving sours down there. Right?
Sure.
Which is unique, right?
Is that a tough sell for food, though?
What's that?
Sours?
Well, you know what? Yeah, and I think overall, traditional sours as we know them,
Sure.
right, and which we've won medals at GABF for them, right, are still tough in general for customers and our customers. But the kettle sours that we're doing, especially fruited ones, are wonderful, right? Or more, I always like to say they're tart rather than sour.
Sure.
Everybody has to have one on, right? It's one of our requirements because we sell the heck out of them. We really do. It appeals to some of our customer base that is more of the wine or cider drinker, and they love them.
And that comes with the education as well, of pushing
absolutely.
people towards,
Absolutely. I don't like beer. How about you try this? In fact, I found myself doing it at a party recently this summer, because I had our...
You were that guy at the party, yeah.
Well, people expect you to be,
Walking
right?
around, yeah,
like,
yeah.
if I don't show up with
That's
the
why I don't go
beer,
to parties anymore.
I'm like, ugh. Like, you didn't bring beer? I'm like, all right, I guess I'm bringing beer to everything, because that's what everyone expects me to. So, especially family parties, they expect it. And I have it out there, and I have, people, are my relatives really going to like sour beer? And so I brought a Little Red Wagon, which has strawberry rhubarb in it, right? And so they're like, wow, this is great. The people who traditionally, I just give it to them, and they're drinking it all afternoon. So
it's interesting that you're going to parties and people are asking you about beer as opposed to, have you made a hard seltzer yet?
We have one in development right now.
Do you?
We do.
You have to, right?
Yeah, again, you think about it, I'd say 5 years ago, I would have said, no, absolutely not. But
I think everybody would have.
When you look at, well, first of all, legally, all our breweries can make them.
Sure.
Right? And we had this discussion, we had a board meeting discussion about this, because I rolled out that we have some in development. So again,
and was that coming from customer feedback as well, of like, hey, do you have a X on tap? Or do you
I'll be honest with you. I've not heard people tell me that, but I look at the marketplace and I look at the sales and I look at, White Claw. I mean, which is look,
it's something like up 300% from last year. Like the numbers are just bananas.
And they found the great next stage for Mike's, right?
Sure, of course.
Because Mike's, I think, was just
Mark Anthony Brands, which owns White Claw and Mike's Hard Lemonade.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, but what we did is we recently went out and did a tasting. I was at a beer festival that we hold, and one of our non-brewery partners, a local beer bar, we always invite, and they had hard seltzers, and I'm trying them. I'm like,
well, this is the last time we invite you to our party.
I'm like, wow, this is actually excellent, right? And I talked to a couple of brewers who are like, yeah, we're making some. I'm like, so this is a thing? And then I did the research in the market. I'm like, oh boy. Again, if we're gonna appeal, and you know what, the sell is on it, 100 calories, right? It's appealing to that group, and people that are making it are saying, I can't keep it on the tap. It's so popular. So I'm like, if we're going to be in business and we're going to appeal to more, let's put it up against it. But let's do it right. Let's develop it right. So we've done a lot of research around it. So we're in development of those. And it's one of the most cost-effective things that you can make. Right? I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, it's sugar and water. It's pretty great. Yeah, when you don't need hop contracts for it, it's
not
pretty
as
nice.
simple as that, but it is.
Yeah.
It literally is sugar.
All right. In a minute, I'm going to ask you what your hope for beer is. But first, I want to thank our episode sponsors who make this podcast possible. G&D Chillers is ready to meet your chilling challenge. You should download the free Tavor app today. Hops Direct has grown hops in Yakima Valley for 5 generations, so reach out to them. And Clarion Lubricants is the expert you need when it comes to your brewery lubricating needs. Mark Edelson, Iron Hill Brewery Restaurant, all of the many locations. You've been doing this since the beginning. Do you have a hope for beer going forward?
I do. Two. One is that beer over the centuries has been every man's product, right? It's the beer. It's the product of everybody, right?
Yeah.
It's in certain cultures. It's just part of every meal, and it has a long history with Americans as well. And I hope that continues as an overall. I see beer overall declining. I see the two brewers at the top bashing each other with, and that's not good for beer. And they know it. They can't step away from some of the marketing people in their organizations, right? And so that's not helping. And so I hope that beer overall continues. I know craft is safe right now, but I hope overall beer continues with that. And I think within the craft market, the hope that I hope continues. There's one reason that I got into this industry is that when I started talking to people in the industry, the camaraderie and the open bookness of, hey, this is how I do this. Here's the recipe kind of thing. Where this is how we do things. You pick up the phone and call people. For example, hard seltzer. I've called 4 brewers that are telling me exactly how they're making it, including some larger ones.
Okay.
Right? And that's how our industry's always been. Let's make the pie bigger, and let's not worry about taking the pie slice from each other. And I hope for craft that continues to be that way.
Mark Edelson, Iron Hill Brewing. Thanks so much for sitting down. This was a lot of fun. This is if you're in any of the 16 locations where Iron Hill has a brewery, you should stop by, get a burger, have a beer. Thanks again for doing this. If you have questions for me, listeners, folks you want to hear on the show, topics you want discussed, I know that there's been some ask for more of the business side of things, so hopefully this podcast helped fill that need a little bit. You can reach out to me at John Hall, JOHNHOLL at beerandbrewing.com. You can join the conversation on Twitter at John_Hall. But you should also go to beerandbrewing.com. There you can read all about what's happening in the homebrewing world and the craft beer scene and everything else in between, from ingredients to recipes. That's beerandbrewing.com. There you can also subscribe to the print magazine. Please, please, please subscribe to the print magazine. It keeps us going. Thanks to our sponsors. Thanks again, Mark, and everybody here at Iron Hill for having us, and we'll be back next week with a brand new episode. Thanks so much for listening. Cheers.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.